You think you cannot do this without them, without the phone call before the decision, without the reassurance after the mistake, without someone in the room who knows your name and your history and tells you in some small way that you are going to be fine. Underneath the career, the relationships, the carefully managed image, there is a quiet, animal fear that without that support, you will simply stop functioning. You will fall apart, or fail, or disappear. Friedrich Nietzsche, a man more alone than almost anyone in the history of philosophy, would tell you something that sounds cruel before it sounds true. The wound is not your solitude. The wound is your dependence. And until you remove it, you will spend your life as a reflection of other people's opinions, never once becoming the thing you were actually capable of being. Here is the conditioning nobody warns you about. From the moment you were born, your survival was outsourced. You could not feed yourself. You could not protect yourself. You needed an adult to notice you, to soothe you, to keep you alive. This is not a flaw. It's biology. But the side effect is that your nervous system learned a brutal equation early. Alone equals danger, support equals survival. That equation made sense when you were 2. It makes considerably less sense when you are 35, fully capable, and still organizing every decision around the question, what will they think? Picture the version of this that's already happened to you. You're staring at a draft text to someone you used to call every day, and the silence on the other end feels less like distance and more like a verdict. Or you're standing in an empty apartment after years of feeling automatically supported by a marriage, a roommate, a hometown full of people who knew your whole history, and the quiet in that apartment feels less like peace and more like a countdown. You start scrolling for someone, anyone, who might tell you what to do next. That instinct, the reflex to find an external voice before you trust your own, is not a character flaw. It's a conditioned reflex. And like any reflex, it can be retrained. This is why solitude feels less like peace and more like a slow suffocation. Psychologists have a term for what happens when a person is rescued, soothed, or rewarded for never having to rely on their own judgment. Learned helplessness. Every time someone steps in to fix what you could have fixed, decide what you could have decided, or comfort you out of a feeling you could have sat with, a small piece of your independent capacity goes quiet. Not because you're weak, because you were trained, repeatedly, gently, lovingly, to expect rescue. So when the rescue isn't there, when the job ends and nobody is hiring, when the relationship ends and the apartment is silent, when the family that used to hold you up simply isn't available anymore, you don't experience this as an opportunity. You experience it as abandonment. You panic. You start looking for the missing piece when the truth is far more uncomfortable. There was never a missing piece. There was only an undeveloped one. Yours. Nietzsche understood this better than almost anyone before or since, because he lived it without a single safety net. By 34, his health had collapsed so completely, violent migraines, near blindness, a stomach that rejected most food, that he resigned his university professorship and simply left. No university, no steady income, no permanent home. The one creative partnership that meant the most to him, his friendship with the composer Richard Wagner, ended in bitter rupture. A woman he proposed to, Lou Salome, refused him and stayed close instead with his own friend, a betrayal that wounded him for years. By every external measure, Nietzsche was a man with no support, no institution, no marriage, no real home. Just a series of cheap rented rooms in Switzerland and Italy, where he walked alone for hours every day because walking was the only thing that quieted the pain in his skull. It was in exactly that condition, sick, friendless, unemployed, unloved by the one woman he wanted, that he wrote almost everything you've ever heard attributed to him. The entire architecture of his philosophy was built in a small room in a village called Sils Maria by a man with nobody checking in on him. This is the part people skip when they quote Nietzsche on inspirational posters. They want the line about what doesn't kill you making you stronger, without the years of total isolation that line was extracted from. He did not theorize about solitude from a comfortable chair surrounded by colleagues. He lived inside it, daily, for the back half of his life. And what he concluded was this: most people never become themselves because they never get far enough away from the herd to find out what themselves even means. He called it herd morality, the unconscious habit of borrowing your values, your opinions, even your sense of what you're allowed to feel proud of from whatever group happens to be standing closest to you. The herd is comforting because it never asks you to stand on your own judgment. It hands you a ready-made identity in exchange for one thing: you must never leave it. The moment you do, the moment you make a decision the herd doesn't approve of, the moment you go quiet instead of explaining yourself, the moment you simply disappear from the group chat for a while, the herd does not shrug. It punishes. It calls you cold. It calls you selfish. It calls you different now, said in the tone reserved for betrayal. Nietzsche's answer to that punishment was not to fight back. It was to stop needing the herd's verdict at all. The courtroom you've been performing for notice what this means practically. Every time you've delayed a decision until you could run it past someone, your mother, your group chat, your ex, the comment section, you were not gathering information. You were appearing before a court you appointed yourself, asking for a verdict on whether you're allowed to want what you want. The herd doesn't even have to say anything cruel for this to work. The mere possibility of disapproval is enough to make most people quietly abandon a decision they were otherwise sure of. Nietzsche's challenge is blunt. Dissolve the court. Not by getting angry at the people in it. Most of them never agreed to sit on a jury you imagined into existence, but by simply stopping the practice of submitting your choices for review before you've made them. The moment you stop appearing before that court, something strange happens. People who genuinely care about you adjust and meet you where you actually are. People who only valued you as a defendant, who needed their verdict, tend to drift because there's no longer a trial for them to preside over. Both outcomes tell you something true about who was actually in your corner. Here is the uncomfortable part if you're currently leaning on a lot of people. Support, past a certain point, doesn't strengthen you. It atrophies you. Think of a broken arm in a cast. The cast is necessary for 6 weeks. It protects the bone while it heals. Leave it on for 2 years, and you don't get a stronger arm. You get a withered one because the muscle never had to work. Constant external support functions the same way on a mind. Every decision you outsource, every "what do you think I should do?" you ask, before you've even tried to answer it yourself, is one more rep your own judgment doesn't get to do. You can see this same mechanism in something as small as your phone. Notice how many times a day you reach for validation before you've even decided what you think. A text to see if anyone reacts to news before you've decided how you feel about it yourself. A photo posted and refreshed for the first few likes before you decide whether the moment was actually good. A decision held in limbo until a friend replies, "Yes, do it," even though you'd already typed the same conclusion in your own head 3 hours earlier. None of these habits are dramatic on their own. The damage is in the compounding, thousands of small outsourced verdicts, each one teaching the same lesson. My own conclusion isn't real until someone else confirms it. Psychologist Albert Bandura spent decades studying what he called self-efficacy, a person's belief in their own capacity to handle what comes. The research is consistent and a little brutal. People with low self-efficacy don't just feel more anxious, they perform worse, give up sooner, and interpret ordinary setbacks as proof they were right to doubt themselves. And the fastest way to keep someone's self-efficacy low is, ironically, to keep rescuing them before they ever have to test it. Nietzsche would call this a kind of slow theft. Not theft of money or time, but theft of the one thing that was ever going to make you formidable. The unbroken habit of relying on your own mind first. So what do you do with the absence when it happens? When the people, the title, the relationship, the safety net simply isn't there anymore? Nietzsche's answer sounds almost insane until you sit with it. You stop treating the absence as a wound to be healed and start treating it as material to be used. He had a phrase for this: Amor, Fati, love of fate, not resignation, not gritted, teeth tolerance. Love, the deliberate choice to look at the exact conditions you've been handed, including the lonely ones, and decide that these, specifically, are the raw material you needed all along. Think about how a blade is actually made. Nobody forges steel in a warm room with friends offering encouragement between strikes. Steel is folded under heat it didn't ask for, hammered in isolation, plunged into cold it didn't choose, and only becomes useful after surviving conditions that would have ruined it if it had stayed soft. You cannot become formidable in conditions engineered for your comfort. You become formidable in conditions that force you to find out what you're actually made of. And a support system, however well-intentioned, removes exactly that pressure. This is not an argument for manufacturing misery. Nietzsche was pointing at something narrower. When isolation arrives anyway, and it will, because no one escapes a season with no one in their corner, the only real choice you have is whether you spend it waiting to be rescued or spend it discovering what you can build with your own 2 hands while no one is watching. You've probably seen a version of this play out in someone's actual life, even if you didn't recognize the mechanism at the time. Someone loses the job that gave their day's structure and their identity its main label. For a while it looks like collapse. No title, no team, no calendar full of meetings to hide inside. And then, because there is genuinely no one left to consult, and no schedule left to follow, they're forced into the one room nobody volunteers to enter on purpose, a stretch of completely unstructured time with only their own judgment to rely on. Some people use that room to fall apart. A smaller number use it to finally ask the question they'd been too supported, too busy, too comfortable to ask before: what would I actually build if no one were watching or approving? The isolation didn't create the answer. It simply removed every excuse for not looking for one. An American writer working in almost the same decade, on the other side of the Atlantic, arrived at a strikingly similar conclusion through a completely different route. Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his essay on Self-Reliance, argued that the moment you start measuring your choices against a crowd's approval, you've already surrendered the only thing that made those choices yours. 2 men, 2 countries, no contact with each other, landing on the same diagnosis. A life built around needing permission is not a life. It's a tenancy. You're renting your own existence from whoever happens to be granting the approval that week. The forge doesn't ask your permission either. It just applies the pressure. What you do with it is the only part that's actually yours to decide. This is where it stops being philosophy and starts being practice. 4 tools, starting today. The internal witness. For the next 7 days before you reach for someone else's opinion on a decision. What to wear, what to say, whether you're overreacting, whether you made the right call, stop. Ask yourself the question first, alone, out loud. Sit with your own answer for at least 60 seconds before anyone else weighs in. You're not cutting people off. You're refusing to let your own judgment go last every single time. The decision quarantine. Pick one category of decision this week. Small, low stakes. Doesn't matter if you get it wrong. And make every decision in that category, without consulting anyone. What you eat, what route you take, how you spend your evening. The content doesn't matter. What matters is the rep. You're teaching your nervous system through repetition that a decision made alone does not end in disaster. That training only happens in the doing, the eternal return test. Before you act on something significant, ask, if I had to live this exact choice, on a loop, forever, would I still make it? Not, will people approve of it? Would you, alone, with nobody watching, choose it? If the honest answer is yes, you've found a decision that's actually yours. If the honest answer is no, you've found out you were about to act on someone else's expectations, instead of your own judgment, and you found out before it cost you anything. The unwitnessed log. At the end of each day, write down one thing you did that no one else saw, and no one else will ever know about. A choice you made well. A moment you held your ground internally. A small discipline you kept purely because you said you would. Don't post it. Don't mention it. Most people's confidence is rented from an audience. This is how you start owning. None of this requires you to become cold, or to cut every relationship out of your life. It requires the willingness to be uncomfortable in your own company, long enough to discover you can actually survive there. There's a trap waiting on the other side of this, worth naming before you fall into it. The moment people start building genuine self-reliance, a specific temptation shows up. Find a new authority to hand the steering wheel to. A mentor. A guru. A partner whose approval becomes the new metric you secretly chase. A philosophy, even this one, followed so literally it becomes one more set of rules you're terrified of breaking. Watch for the language of this trap in your own head. It rarely announces itself as dependency. It shows up dressed as devotion. I just don't make big decisions without checking with them first. Said about a partner, a parent, or even a therapist whose actual job was to teach you how to eventually need them less. Devotion built on genuine respect can survive that question being asked out loud. Devotion that's secretly fear of standing alone usually can't. Nietzsche distrusted disciples almost as much as he distrusted conformists, because a disciple has simply swapped one herd for a smaller, more flattering one. The goal was never to stop needing people. Humans who pretend they need no connection at all aren't free, they're usually just defended. And there's a difference. The goal is to stop needing anyone's permission to know your own mind. You can love people, rely on people, build a life with people, and still be the final authority on what you do with your one existence. The test is simple. If that person, that mentor, that relationship disappeared tomorrow, would you still know who you are? If the honest answer is no, you haven't built self-reliance. You've just relocated the dependency to a more comfortable address. There's an image Nietzsche returned to again and again. A lone figure on a mountain path, high above the village, looking down at the lights of all the people who never left. He wasn't writing poetry for its own sake. He was describing exactly where he spent most of his adult life, walking alone, for hours, along the cliffs above Sills. Maria, with no one beside him, and no one waiting for him at the bottom. From down in the village, that figure on the mountain looks like exile. It looks like punishment. The people below see someone with no one, and they assume that absence is the whole story. What they cannot see from where they're standing is the view. They cannot see that the same distance that makes you invisible to the herd is the only vantage point from which you can actually see your own life clearly. Not as the herd frames it. Not as your family expects it. Not as the relationship you lost to find it. But as it actually is, without anyone else's shadow falling across it. You do not climb that path because you were abandoned. You climb it because it was always the only place you were ever going to find out what you're capable of carrying on your own back. So here's what I want you to actually do with this. Starting today for the next 7 days, run what I'll call the Sovereign Week. Every decision, no matter how small, gets the internal witness first. One category of choice this week gets the full decision quarantine. No outside input, start to finish. Before anything that genuinely matters, you run it through the eternal return to you will feel exposed. That's the correct response, not a warning sign. The discomfort you feel when no one is reassuring you is not proof that something is wrong. It's proof that a muscle which has been resting for years is finally being asked to work again. Let it ache. Don't reach for the old rescue out of habit. Sit in the quiet and notice that you are, in fact, still standing. By day 7, you won't have solved loneliness. You also won't need to. You'll have simply proven, in small, repeatable ways, that the floor underneath you was never actually missing. It was just covered by people standing on it for you. This is the entry point. The part of self-reliance I can actually lay out for you here, in a video meant for everyone. There's a deeper layer to this, about how Nietzsche dealt with the specific people who try to drag a self-reliant person back into needing them again, that gets harder to say plainly in a public video without it getting flagged. That material lives behind the join button, for the people who actually want to keep going past this point. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe. And if you're ready for the rest of it, you know where to find it.